Hi, Julie.
Hey, Melissa.
Julie, do you know what today is?
Tell me.
This episode that we are recording is the 300th episode of the Brave Writer podcast.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. That's a lot of talking.
As the keeper of the spreadsheet, I was like, oh my goodness. And I didn't even know if it would be on your radar that you had hit this huge milestone.
Not on my radar at all because I'm like a head down workhorse. I don't think about those milestones. So it feels amazing that you noticed and told me. And honestly, one of the funny things about all of it with the podcast is I feel like we're just talking to our friends all the time.
Yeah.
And every week I hear from people listening who are applying the things that we're learning together on this show. And so 300 episodes of that, I mean, that'll take a long time to work through. So if you're like new to the show and you're like, I need to hear more stuff to support me, there's a lot.
That's right.
You can just start listening.
And there's so much that is so good. I mean, it's all good. So I've been part of this podcast for, I think it's about 2.5 years now, which kind of blows my mind.
Same.
But I was one of your early interviewees in your first season of the podcast. I think it was your first season. It was pretty early. I know I still lived in San Diego because I remember setting up the microphone like it was balanced on my bed because we lived in such a tiny little California bungalow.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. You know, honestly, my very first season was co-hosted by my son, Noah.
Oh.
So I have all these episodes. If you go all the way back to number 1, you will hear Noah, and he actually weighs in with his own experience of homeschooling long before he was a father. You know, he's in his 20s at the time. And those are really dear episodes. And then I started doing like official seasons when he moved on. And I think that's when I had you on for the first time. But it's been quite an enjoyable journey. We've gotten to meet so many incredible people over the years and interview really smart people. But I think for me, the most incredible part of everything that happens through Brave Writer, the communications, the things I've written, the webinars we've done, the products we've built together, there are principles that keep coming back around. And it's so funny, Melissa, just this weekend, those of you who've read The Brave Learner know that I have a best friend and homeschool mentor named Dottie. And her youngest daughter has 3 children now, and she's the same age as Noah. And of course, they knew each other when they were small and were really good friends. And her youngest daughter's name is Noah.
Wow.
Yeah, without the H. And I don't even think it was necessarily about my son, but also like she didn't hate that name.
That's right. Oh, I
She doesn't
love
have
that.
negative associations. Anyway, point is, she and one of her best friends are homeschooling right now. And we got into this conversation about home learning. And I was saying all the things I've said a million times. And for them, they were like dropping little bombs of brand new insight into what they need to know at the front end of the journey. Like they were like, I've never heard this. I never heard that. Her little friend said to me, you know, gosh, each thing you say solves a problem.
Imagine that.
And it felt so good because I love them so much. They're so dear and they're both so smart. And yet when you're new to something, you're new to something. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for us to keep recycling insights.
I agree. And, you know, it helps to hear things more than once. In fact, as I'm saying that, I'm hearing the language directly from the darts and the arrows about spin and spiral. We don't just do one issue that has prepositions in it. We're going to circle back to that concept of prepositions over and over for our kids. And it's like that for us with like these insights about how to make homeschooling work.
Yes. So what are we doing today, Melissa?
Yeah, it helps to hear it again so that it lands, or you're in a different place with your kids or at different ages and it sinks in a little differently or more deeply. Or just it's fresh because it's been a long time. You thought you had this handled and now you realize, oh, I could use a refresher.
That's it.
On these ideas. Okay, so hit me.
So today We are going to look at the 3 most essential skills. I mean, there are lots of essential skills. Boiling down the list was a challenge. But these are the 3 things that I return to on a regular basis when I am coaching homeschoolers. I actually had a coaching call last week with a mom, and I found myself saying the things I say so many times, and she's even been around Brave Writer a lot. But like you said, sometimes the thing lands differently because you're in a different phase of your homeschooling journey. And sometimes you did it for a while and then got interested in something else and forgot that this was a principle that could really help you. So we are going to visit what we consider the 3 top skills, ways of thinking that we have covered many times on this podcast, but we're going to address them with fresh insight and a conversation.
I love it. And I love this list.
So, Melissa, what's number 1?
Number 1 is jot it down.
Oh my God. I am stunned how often I share this principle with someone who doesn't know it, and every person has the same reaction. They are in shock at how simple it sounds, and I can read in their eyes the imagined delight of their children when they are about to implement it. So as they listen, I can see them picturing the joy on a child's face. You can't say that about too many principles, can you, when you're talking about homeschooling? Yeah. So here's what Jot It Down is for all of you who are new. And for those of you who already know what it is and have done it, I invite you to listen with fresh ears and see if some aspect of this lands with you in a way you may not have thought about it. Jot it down is basically the little catchphrase I use to talk about catching your child in the act of spontaneous self-expression. It's a very long sentence for jot it down. So basically, your child is building up things they want to tell you all the time. I just had 2 grandchildren at my house yesterday, and they had so much to tell me. My little 3-year-old grandson is grabbing the field guide that I keep out at all times, putting on the binoculars, pulling it out, taking me outside. I want to see a bird. I want to see a bird. He opens the book. This is the bird I want to see. What is it? Of course, it's a scarlet tanager that never comes to my yard. So I tell him it's a scarlet tanager. It would be amazing if we saw it. He starts saying, where will it be? I said, if it comes, it'll come here. We started listening to sounds. He had thoughts about the sounds. Spontaneous self-expression is a child fully engaged with reality around them, their experiences, the stories they're hearing, the observations they're making, and they tell it to you because they want to, not because you've asked them to. That's the first part of Jot It Down.
Right. It's volunteering those stories or those facts that are so interesting. Kids love to collect information and to show what they know. And when we're really tuned into listening, first of all, keeping this sort of jotted down mentality, I think makes us better listeners. Because even if we're not grabbing a notebook and starting to write it down, and that has so much value, and we'll talk about it, but even if we're just in that like listening and capturing mentality, well, then we're not looking at our phones and we're not in our heads. For me, that's a problem, right? I had to fight that so much when my kids were little to get out of my own head and really be in the moment with them and listen and engage and ask questions and let them tell me what they know and what they think and what they notice.
I love that you said about getting out of your own head. Before we pivot to the second half of Jot It Down, I was with my other grandson on Saturday, and we were very engaged playing, and it was my daughter and her son and me, and we were just mirroring everything he said. He's bilingual, so he speaks Spanish, but he's learning English currently. So he's really in the repetition mode of English. So I was very, very engaged. And at some point, after about an hour of this very, very mirrory moment, my daughter went to get us something to drink. And my brain started thinking about something totally other. And I literally zoned out. Like I was suddenly not where I was. And he was talking at me. And my daughter came back in the room and she's like, Mom, he needs you to talk. And it snapped me out of it. I was literally in like a little bit of a daze. And I think many of us, well, we need those micro breaks too, right?
We
like
do.
When you're this involved. But it was a good example of what you're talking about, that sometimes we're not really tracking. what our kids are saying. So Jot It Down invites you first to tune into those spontaneous moments of self-expression. And then when you notice your child is in the white hot heat of saying those things, the facts, the story, the observation, you grab any sheet of paper or back of an envelope that's available to you and you jot down their exact words as close as you can get them. Your job is not to interrupt them. It's not to announce that you're writing it down. You simply do the activity in front of their eyes. And most kids, when they see you suddenly jotting things down while they're talking, are going to ask you, Mom, Dad, parent, what are you doing? And here's the script you want to adopt. This is so good. I'm writing it down so I don't forget it. Keep going.
Perfect. Perfect. And that validates to the child, oh, my words and my ideas have value.
They have so much value. They deserve to be written and remembered.
Right.
Because remember, when your kids are talking and when you're talking, just like even listening to this podcast, kind of disappears into the air, right? You retain what you retain. But if you write something down, you can read it 3 weeks later when you've forgotten all about it, and it will call back the memory of the conversation when you said it. You'll read it in a new way. It can be read by your children and your grandchildren. We're all reading my mother's writing, and she's been gone for 6 months, right? So writing has this like permanence to it that kids get because ostensibly you've been reading them books since they were born. And so when they see their own words are as valuable as words that make it into a book, they make the connection that the writer lives inside their bodies already, even before they can read and write.
That is so important. You have just made me flash on a memory from when I was really little. When I was in second grade, I guess we had a class project. It was writing our own autobiography. At age what, like 7. I still have mine. I still have it. And I remember that I copied from a book. It must have been a picture book because and we had cameras and we took like a roll of film, and so the pictures were glued into the book, and I wrote on the front by Missy Brannon.
Oh.
Illustrated by author.
Oh my gosh.
And when my teacher saw it, like I still remember her bursting out laughing, not a mocking laugh, like it was a delighted laugh. And then I like realized that none of the other kids had written that. And I think it took me like, half an hour to copy the word illustrated off of a picture book. But that was what real writers did. That was what real books looked like.
That is so adorable. In fact, I still remember when Johanna was like 4 years old. She was such a storyteller. And so I started taking sheets of, just printer paper, folding them in half, stapling them down the sides. I'd usually put a construction paper cover on, so I'd staple it all together into a little folded book. And then whenever she got ready to just draw and think of stories, there was like a whole stack of these. I kept them in a basket, and she'd get up in the morning and just draw pictures on all the pages. And then at some point during the day, I'd get a pen and I'd say, tell me what this picture is. What's this one? And it would become a book. Even if it wasn't like a perfectly linear story, she was narrating the meaning that went with that illustration.
Yes.
And then we would toss that writing in the library basket and read it aloud at bedtime or at nap time. And the experience was, I'm a writer. And this is what Jot It Down does. And by the way, it can even work that way with a resistant 12-year-old, with a blocked 16-year-old.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I recommend with these older kids, just admit, like, I know that the act of writing and talking and thinking, all that right now is a little bit logjam. So I'm going to help you sometimes. I'll just jot down your sort of fire hose amount of language, and then we'll work on it together. If you have a truly blocked teen, wait until you're having an argument about something that matters to them. They want more time playing video games. They want to drive the car downtown. They want to, I don't know, whatever it is that is the thing you're trying to set a boundary about. They don't want to shower 3 times a week, whatever it is.
Right.
When you get into that conversation, Instead of telling them all of your wonderful adult reasonable logic, start jotting down their reasons as they state them. It is shocking to your teens when you take them so seriously that you'll write down their reasoning. This is the beginning of helping them think logically, like an essay writer, like a person with a perspective. And if they ask you what you're doing, you can just say, you know what, I'm taking you seriously, and I realize I need to write this down to reflect on it. Now you're starting to help them experience the power of their own thinking, like why it matters that they write it down. So you can reflect on it, so you can think about it later. What an idea.
You know those mornings when even getting the kids fed feels like a win, let alone juggling everything else on your plate? I've sure had those days where I just needed a moment to breathe. That's why I love what Maestro Music is doing for homeschool families. Picture your child settling in with their instrument, headphones on, learning from one of Maestro's hand-selected instructors who truly care about helping your child find their own musical voice. And here's something special. Maestro is offering a full month of private lessons completely free. That's 4 live sessions tailored to your child's pace and interests. Visit www.maestromusic.online/brave to sign up or find the link in our show notes. Right. And it allows the language to grow and develop as well for those older kids, especially. I've used that technique so often with high school age kids or my college age kids. My daughter used to call me from Cal Poly when she was struggling with a paper, and I would say, tell me the argument. And I would just write down what she was saying. I mean, you could use a transcription tool as well these days. And seeing her own argument, got over the hurdle. Or I remember another time, one of the kids in a Shakespeare club that I was teaching, he, after club one day, he was so upset. We had a we, and he was like, I wish you could talk my parents into, I wish you could convince them that it's a good thing, that we should have it. And he starts listing all these reasons why it was a good thing for their family. And so I started jotting them down. And I handed him and I said, Finn, look, this is exactly what you just told me. Your parents are both writers. Why don't you take your notes, and write this up? You've got some solid arguments here. Write it up and see what happens. And that's what he did.
That is how I taught Noah to do the expository essay. He wanted to play these first-person shooter video games that I, at the time, found very upsetting. And so we made a list of his reasons, and then I sent him to do research and asked him, showed him how to build it into an essay. And ironically, by the time I finished the essay, I was persuaded. It actually did persuade me. And he still remembers that. I think one of the things that we want to say then, to sort of sum up this jot it down practice, is that you are choosing to take seriously the self-expression of your children, so much so you're willing to put it in your own writing and then read it back to them with an interested audience. Bring it out at the dinner table or at nap time and say, this was so good. I just want to read it to everybody. I was afraid I'd forget it, so I wrote it down. Let me read it to you. And let your child look at the faces of people listening to their writing being read. We write for interested readers. We do not write for a grade. We do not write for evaluation. We write to make an impression on a reader. So why jot it down creates this shock in the eyes of parents every time I share it for the first time is that they know that. They know that if they put their child's words in writing and read it back to them, those kids would be delighted. You know it. You're listening to me now, and you can already picture how your child will feel hearing their words read back to them. Now, I just want one quick caveat. There is a child category every now and then who doesn't want you to write while they're talking. They feel like you're not paying attention, even though you really are. So you set the pen down, you let them finish their story, and when they leave, you try to capture as much of it as you can from memory, as close as you can to their language, and then you still read that back at dinner. And they will be shocked. A lot of times that really flips it around for them.
Right. You just described the practice of narration that we
Yes.
often ask our kids to do. I've just read you something, tell it back to me, or we've learned something together, tell me what you remember from it. That's
Yeah.
exactly what that practice is.
So good.
I think also it's worth pointing out, just like there's an onboarding phase for our kids when they're learning a new skill, if jotting it down is new to a parent, it doesn't have to be high pressure. I had friends who, when their kids were little, they just had a piece of paper stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet. And whenever one of the kids said something really funny or memorable, they would jot it down on the refrigerator. And they didn't have that language for it. But I loved going to their house and reading and laughing over all the hilarious things that had been captured that way.
That's perfect. The other thing you can do is kind of stash a couple of clipboards in the places you congregate the most, and it becomes the jotted down clipboard. And your kids will eventually say to you, "Hey, Mom, write this on the clipboard." That is another amazing way to make that practice happen. So this is like a cornerstone practice that differentiates Brave Writer from all the other curricula. And even if you're using other programs in your co-op or whatever, you can do jotting it down. This is a freebie, and it is the most transformative experience in writing when it happens to you. So give that gift to your children. Melissa, what's our second principle?
Number 2 is there are no educational emergencies.
Woo! How relieving.
What? You mean the stakes aren't breakneck at every moment?
You know, I wish I could claim ownership of this phrase. I see that I'm quoted saying it all the time, and it's a secondhand phrase for me. I got it from someone who got it from someone else. I don't even know the original author, but I am more than happy to be the passer on of such a great catchphrase. No educational emergencies, as I understand it, is that we are saying that it isn't an emergency when a child doesn't know something yet, no matter how old they are. The only way forward in education is to take seriously where your child is, not where you wish they would be. So when you have a child who's struggling, it doesn't matter if the entire third grade isn't struggling. That doesn't mean your child's behind, and it's not an emergency where now you have to cram fractions because your child's behind. It's not an emergency. It is your opportunity to meet the child exactly where they are and provide them with the practice, the resources, and the support they need to make progress at their own pace.
That's right. The whole notion of learning specific things at specific ages is just a construct that was developed out of necessity for teaching kids in large groups, right?
Yes, exactly.
Until it was necessary to decide, what am I going to teach in this context, in this age group of children, people just learned what they needed to know as it popped up, or they absorbed it from what was happening around them.
And here's the thing. We all feel tempted to compare our kids, whether it's to other homeschool families or the charter school down the street or the kids in your co-op. But most kids who are raised in a home education environment move at variable speeds in each of the subjects. One of the big jokes when I was homeschooling was, what grade is your child in? And we would say, they're in 5th grade for reading, they're in 3rd grade for writing, they're in 7th grade for math, and who knows what history is. Like there was this understanding that they are, learning at different rates in each subject. And sometimes they sort of sped ahead of their peers, and sometimes they were a little behind them, not for lack of ability, but maybe lack of exposure, or the program that you selected moved at a different pace than the one that was being taught at the local school or co-op. So when we say no educational emergencies, what we're trying to do is lower the bar so that you will experience success. Instead of setting a standard that your child isn't hitting and feeling guilty, anxious, and worried, start with exactly where the child is. Lower that bar to where they can be successful and build the skills and stamina incrementally at a pace that child can handle. And you can openly declare to people who might criticize you, whether it's the school board father-in-law or your best friend who's a teacher or whoever, you can say, oh, my child's doing great. They are learning at the exact pace that is allowing them to master the material. I feel so good about where they are. Memorize that. That is what you can say back. Who can argue with that? Who can argue with you saying, I feel so good about my child. They're learning at the pace that allows them to master the material. End of discussion.
Right. I think if any parents are feeling unease with the idea of this within themselves, one of the best things you can do is treat yourself to a delicious read of the book Understood Betsy.
Oh, that's so true.
Because Betsy is this girl, and this is set in like the early 1900s, and she has gone to a big city school, and then she winds up living with these relatives in rural Vermont, where there's a one-room schoolhouse, and her mind is blown on day one when her teacher just sort of assesses where she is, and she's like, okay, you're in whatever, first grade math and fourth grade reading. And Betsy's like, that's allowed? What?
Yes, and honestly, part of the reason you homeschool is for tailor-making education.
Yes.
So it should not be a shock to you that they will excel in some subjects and be behind, quote unquote, behind in others. The other thing is, if you do detect a unique struggle that suggests a learning disability, dyslexia, dysgraphia, you have the right and opportunity to get help that is tailor-made for your child.
Right.
You can hire a specialist, you can get a tutor. And that also needs to be done with kindness and patience, not desperation and panic. Here's why. Your children pick up your panic. Think about your child who falls off a bike and breaks an arm. The first reaction you have internally is panic. But is that what you want the child to take away from that situation, that you were overwhelmed and don't know how to handle a broken arm? Or is it, oh, honey, you fell off your bike. We're going to go to the hospital, check to make sure that your arm isn't broken. But if it is, we'll get you everything you need. You're going to be fine.
Right.
And that's the way we want to treat a child who's struggling with math or finding it difficult to learn phonics. We have a catchphrase in Brave Writer, when the tears come, the lesson is done. When we're in educational emergency mode, the way we know it usually is our kid is crying. So when the tears come, just remind yourself there is no emergency here. We've gone over the line into, misery. We're going to step back and match, the challenge to the capacity of this child to execute and be successful.
Now, Julie, what would you say to a parent who lives in one of the states where there is an annual testing requirement and the child has to get a certain score in order to continue homeschooling?
So in most states, I don't think they're allowed to tell you can't homeschool because it's legal. So you might get feedback like you're not allowed to, or you shouldn't advance your child to the next level. But I have not heard, and so forgive me if I'm wrong, somebody can text us and say, well, in my state, you could literally be forced back into public school. But that is not my understanding of, K through 8th grade. Do you know, Lissa?
When we lived in Virginia, and I don't know if this regulation is the same, but in the early 2000s, when I lived in Virginia, there was an annual, you had the option of either doing a portfolio review. And in fact, Brave Writer's own Jeannie Faulkner used to be, she did those kind of portfolio reviews. Or you could administer the CAT test.
Yes.
And I believe the child had to score 28% or above on that test at the grade level in order for there not to be some sort of like probationary period. Now, 28% is not a high bar to deal with. And also you had a little bit of leeway about determining what grade level your child was at.
I was going to say, I think it has more to do with grade level than not homeschooling. So, for instance, same thing in Ohio. We have that same requirement, but the goal is to certify that the child is ready to go up to the next grade. And the fact of the matter is, if your child is scoring that low, they're not.
Right.
No educational emergency. Be where your child is. So that's what I was going to say. Use the state testing as information about what you need to know about your child, not as an indictment about you as the home educator. I remember when one of my kids took the test in California and scored really well on everything but math. And when I went, but this child's good at math. So when I went back and went over the test scores with our educational specialist who was part of the independent study program, it turned out that he failed all of the fractions because we hadn't covered them yet. So he's just guessing. So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, I don't care about his score. We didn't do that this year. We didn't cover that this year because that wasn't in the program I purchased. And I know he's going to learn them next year and we'll be fine. The way to take those tests is as information, not as validation or invalidation of you. And the truth of the matter is, if a child is significantly struggling, getting 28%, that's the time to ask some questions so that you can address what's going on with the child. One of my friends, their child had visual tracking disorder. And it wasn't until doing year-end testing that they discovered it because the child's eyes were jumping on the test in a way that that child knew how to control for when they were at home and had a lot of time and space and comfort. So the testing actually revealed something that needed to be addressed. So I want you to take it more as information rather than as a thumbs up, thumbs down on your homeschool. What if I told you that in either 3, 4, or 6 weeks, you could transform how your child feels about writing? I bet you'd take that deal. This is why I developed the Brave Writer online writing class program. Our classes are bite-sized meals, and they are designed to support you, the busy parent. Our classes are asynchronous. They do not rely on a special download of a video platform or software. Your kids will be interacting with other students and an instructor all through the magic of a discussion board designed specifically for our online class program. Our classes last 3 to 6 weeks. And the reason is we know that you just need a good boost, a deep dive to really catch the vision for how to be your child's best writing coach. Our fall session opens for registration on Monday, July 21st at noon Eastern, and we are still enrolling students in our summer session. So if you're the kind of parent who's like, I want to get something done before the year starts, sign up now. If you're the kind of parent who likes to plan for the fall, sign up starting Monday. We can't wait to serve you and your kids through our online class program. Our teachers are waiting. They are eager to meet your kids. They are professional writers, all of them. You will love them. I hope to see you in one of our classes this fall.
Exactly. And that's why I raised it, because I think parents do get really stressed out about it. And it's funny because the spectrum of our own responses changes as our kids get older. When they're babies, if they're not hitting, the sort of standard milestones, we use that as information and consult, and decide if there needs to be an evaluation. When my son was, 3 months old and wasn't hitting some of the usual milestones, we knew that he needed to have his hearing retested and he needed an evaluation for muscular issues. And that resulted in some diagnoses that allowed me to meet him where he was and meet his needs.
That is exactly the perfect example. Wow. Absolutely perfect. So the bottom line is, don't treat education like a car crash.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need an ambulance. You are not negligent. You are adapting and growing to meet the needs of your child exactly where they are. Oh, and by the way, 18 is an artificial deadline. Some kids don't go to college until 20 or 25. Some kids need more time. I've talked about this with Susan Wise-Bauer before. She's a huge fan of the gap year. And I have 2 kids who took gap years. I have a kid who decided to stay in junior high an additional year just to put off high school one more year. These are wonderful things that you can do as a home educator that are not as available to you in school. So when I say there's no emergencies, I really mean it. You can adapt that education to your child.
Great. All right. What is our third key to homeschooling success, Julie?
So this one I really love, and I don't know if I've ever put it in this phrase, but I think I've done so much writing and speaking about it. When you hit a brick wall of resistance from your child, You have questions to ask yourself that will lead to one of two strategies. And here is the summary of this third key idea: change the topic or change the context. What do I mean by that? So imagine you've got a child who really finds math irritating. These daily sheets of math feels like an unending parade of problems to solve every day with no point. But you're over here saying they really do, though, need to learn this math skill. It's important for them to make steady, incremental progress and to build stamina and skill in math. So you're thinking, I can't really change the subject. They've got to learn math. But could they learn it with a board game? Could they learn it by working with real items off of the page? Could they work with math using measuring cups? Like, are there other ways you're staying with the topic, but you are changing the context of the way that it's learned? Or could you just pair it with snacks? Could you just give them a timer and they know they're done after they've done 5 minutes, or they roll the dice to decide how many problems they're going to do today? We call this enchanting the education inside the book, The Brave Learner. It's adding a little pixie dust to achieve the same goal. You want them to learn math, but we're going to change the context for the way that it's learned because the system had become a little tedious, dull, rote, predictable, onerous. Is that the word I'm looking for?
Yes,
Just
yes.
it's a tedious experience. So we're going to enchant the context.
This is another one of the places where we can really lean into our freedom as homeschoolers to be flexible, to try different things. We don't have to be locked into any one way of learning, and we don't have to stick. Do you know the old story about the ham in the pan, Julie? I feel like
I don't.
this is something we say in my household all the time. The story is there's a newlywed couple, and the young bride makes a ham dinner, and her husband watches as she slices off the end of the ham before she puts it in the roasting pan. And he says, "Why do you do that?" And she says, "I don't know. My mother always did." So she calls her mom, and mom says, "Oh, I don't know. My mother always did." So the bride calls grandma, who says, "Well, my pan was too small." And the metaphor of the story is that it is really easy for us to get locked into doing things the way that they've always been done, or that we have been exposed to the most, and feel like it has to happen this way. Math is an excellent example, but there's so many areas of learning where we can really get locked into, oh, I bought this handwriting curriculum. We have to do it this way. In our adult lives, Julie, how often are you doing math worksheets?
Yeah, never.
You learned those math skills young on worksheets so that you could grow up and do the grown-up math worksheets, right? No?
I mean, it's such a good point, and I think kids know that. Like, they're like, "I've never seen my dad doing a math worksheet. Why do I have to do this?" And yet, there is a certain level at which those incremental skills sometimes benefit from that sort of practical repetition.
Right.
It's sort of like learning to sew on the sewing machine. You do a lot of random stitches on fabric that's never going to become, a dress or a quilt, because you're learning how to manage the pedal and how big the zigzag should be and how to create a buttonhole before you're actually putting a buttonhole on a shirt. So I think we know that there's some value to it. So then what can we do to change up the experience of that worksheet? So that's the change the context. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I want to make sure we include the other as the contrast, which is change the topic. So let's say you're teaching writing. Writing is a skill all by itself. It isn't about history. It's not necessarily about literature. It can be about anything. So you're over here working on trying to learn how to write a paragraph, and you assume that it should be an assignment related to a book or history, but it doesn't have to be. It could be about American Girl dolls. That paragraph could be about baseball. That paragraph could be about watching a bird at a bird feeder. It could be anything that captivates the interest of the child. So here you are thinking, okay, the skill is writing. What's the topic that helps us teach that skill? Similarly with history, history sure can be taught like cycles of history, nation states, wars, empires rising and falling. But could we also teach history through the history of fashion and touch on all those things? Could we teach the history of video gaming and start to notice like the history of artwork, the history of storytelling, the history of technology? And will that touch on some of these other pieces? So this is where we're saying the skill of historical thinking is the goal. The topic is less critical.
I entered college thinking I didn't like history. Even though I loved to read historical fiction, that was in a different category in my brain. But then I had a theater history class. Well, I loved drama. I was a drama kid. And suddenly it's all contextualized with a hook that is so meaningful to me. That's changing the topic. And our kids have all sorts of those hooks.
Exactly.
And they are happening. All of those subjects, whatever your kid is interested, has some place in the context of science and history.
That's it. Science, history, literature, honestly. And of course, literature is not just books anymore. It's also movies. It's also interviews. It's also nonfiction through documentaries, right? So when we're talking about helping our kids, we have to keep in mind two things: content and skills. And when we're teaching a skill, it's nice to either enrich the context of that skill development or use a topic that is beloved by the child to teach that skill, right?
Yes.
But if we have content that we're really trying to move through and it's specific, then we want to think about how can we teach it in a way that it will stick. That's where we're thinking about enchanting the environment. So when we're doing like a DART, and Melissa, you know this better than me because you're writing them, when we get close to a grammar term, we're like getting kids out of their chairs. They're acting things out. They're using highlighters. They're hearing it in the context of literature. This is changing the environment to learn about verbs, right?
Right, exactly.
We say that verbs are the goal. We're not saying, well, we don't like verbs, we're doing adjectives. Verbs are actually the goal. So what can we do to make verbs more interesting to the child?
That's right. One of the jokes in my family is they can tell when I'm at a certain point in writing, when I walk into the room and I'm like, okay, guys, I need another new physical activity for prepositions. Let's brainstorm.
I mean, honestly, Melissa, and we can link this in the show notes. I have a book I used with my kids called On Stage, and it is a book of improvisational activities. We've linked to it before, but I saw it again today and I was like, this was like my ace in the whole book. Anytime I wanted to teach something, I was like, how can we act it out? How can we do a theater game to do this subject? And I'm not kidding you. It's miraculous when you ask kids to show off and put on dress-up clothes and act things out.
Right. To ham it up.
Yes.
Or if they're uncomfortable doing it with their own bodies, then you have them get their favorite action figures or dolls or stuffed animals. And suddenly a dialogue is unfolding and you're jotting it down, by the way.
Right. That's right. That's right. You're also jotting it down. Oh, which reminds me, this kind of brings it full circle as we're winding things up. When my daughter was learning math, it did not come as naturally to her as reading and writing. Those were like her strong suits. And meanwhile, she had a brother who was tearing it up in math, and a lot more reluctant in reading and writing. Okay, so I'm going to talk about both of them because I think this is really great. For my son, who is more like strong suit math, facts-based person, the way we got to reading and writing, he was a good reader, but the way we got to writing was through drawing. We used to get those Dorling Kinserly's books, and he would like trace the outlines of all these like weapons and military tanks and all the things that were interesting to him. And he would write captions for them. And that was sort of his access point. We just used the topic of interest,
Amazing.
The skill of drawing, because that's pencil control, and captions to get him to put some words on the page. Meanwhile, my daughter, who was much more of a writer and less with the math, really relied on Cuisenaire rods, which were fabulous, these units of length rods that helped her learn math. I had her write down in her own words what the steps were to accomplish the math fact or the math process. And it was all in her own writing on note cards. So if we were doing a process she couldn't remember, she'd just pull out the note card and it would tell her in her own writing what steps to follow. This is what we're talking about when we're saying like change the topic, change the context, enchant the education, suit the child to the learning. Don't try and make the learning be the thing that they have to do that isn't suited to them, right?
Right. And to that point, I am very sympathetic to the plight of the homeschooling parent who has spent a lot of time planning some kind of activity or gathering
Oh, gosh.
materials, preparing an experience, maybe buying a program, and is hit with that resistance, right? And in those moments, I had to learn to step back and ask myself, what's my objective right here in this moment? If my objective, and I could identify, oh, right now my objective is actually to help this kid over this hurdle of this math skill. Okay, well, there are lots of different ways we can attack that skill, right? We can change the context.
Right.
But maybe in that moment, on this particular day, my objective is actually to help coach my kid through the experience of persevering through something that's difficult, or that they, okay, I'm going to play a different role in that context. So I'm not making the stakes so high. I don't have to do all the things in all of the moments. And I also had to learn how to take myself out of it. This isn't about me. I get to educate my own self on my own time. How can I make this as rich and enchanting as possible for my child?
I love that you said, what is my objective? So one of the things that I think we undervalue in this whole schooling arrangement, and it kind of ties back now to the jot it down. What creates a sense of joy? What creates a sense of delight? When I talk about jot it down, parents can immediately imagine a smile on their child's face. So that's the kind of energy we're trying to bring here. Not how can I get through and get done? How can I trick my child into doing what I want them to do? How can I, I've talked to moms who've thrown literal parties that their kids have rejected. They may not be looking for you to create a balloons party every time they don't like a subject. It's really asking what is needed to help the child experience the value of the thing we want them to learn. And that's an inside job. I didn't say when your child is learning to write, make sure you decorate the room with crepe paper, because those are not related. The goal is, how does the child experience themselves as a writer? What can I do to trigger that experience? And when we're talking about math facts, how can I trigger the experience of power that comes from being good at them?
Right.
Why would I want to be good at them? And what does it feel like to be good at them? And how can I facilitate that? In our family, we used a couple of math games that were designed to teach the math facts. And there was a certain celebration energy at the end when you had accomplished it. And so then my kids had this internal drive. It wasn't just me saying, well, you have to do it. That's what we're talking about. You want your kids to do copy work and handwrite, and they're like, I see no point. It feels dumb. Well, what makes anyone want to write something down? It's a valuable idea. It's an interesting sentence. It's funny. I see other people doing it and it seems meaningful to them. Start to investigate what turns that light on. And guess what? It takes time.
It does.
You won't know it tomorrow, but you can sit with that for a while. You might even challenge yourself to say, we're not going to do handwriting until I've kind of uncorked what that is for me and my kids.
Right, right.
Be patient.
These are such meaningful ideas. And what excites me about all of them, about this whole conversation, is that there is just so much opportunity for us to have a really wonderful time. If it is feeling tense and stressful, then it's time to put the brakes on and rethink.
That's right.
And experiment and be playful.
Go back to jotting things down, the clever, funny things they say, the smart facts that they know, and remind yourself there's no educational emergencies. And then remember your level of flexibility is you can always change the topic or change the context. And if you take those 3 ideas to heart this year, your homeschool is going to be completely different than the one you're worried about.
Right.
You're going to come into it with an energy of, how can we create this together? Not how can I do this to my child?
That does sound enchanting.
Thank you, Melissa.
Julie, congratulations on 300 episodes of this podcast. And what a gift to be able to share all of these ideas with the world.
Melissa, I just want to say this on the record and on the show. The most enjoyable years of podcasting have been since you became the co-host. You bring research, great anecdotes, beautiful language. I mean, you're so articulate, and mostly you're just so much fun. It's like now I get to see you every week. So this is amazing. It's very, very selfish of me, but I love every minute.
Oh, me too. Me too. It is such a joy for me. And I'm just glad we wandered into the same corner of the internet
when we
as
did.
Baby homeschooling mamas.
Isn't that amazing? Hello. That is so true. All right. If you have ideas for us, you want 301 episodes to go on into the beautiful future, send them to us at our text messaging app. We'll put that phone number on the show notes so you can just click and go. And thanks for joining us and for your faithfulness. Thank you for all your starred reviews and your written reviews. We read them all, and we love you. Okay, that's another Brave Writer episode in the books. Thanks for joining Melissa and me today. We love it when you leave us reviews, when you send us comments via text message. We read them all. We also couldn't do this show without our fabulous production team at Nova, or Jeanette Hall, the Brave Writer team member who handles all those administrative details you know nothing about. In the meantime, we hope that you have a fantastic week. Keep going, think well. We're rooting for you.